Thank you, Alessandra. And thanks for hosting this session today, which is going to be a pretty close connecting session, allowing people to just share their feedback with us openly, right? I'm thankful for partnering with Women in AI for leading this overall partnership, and as well as the guests who will participate today in the discussion. As Alexandra mentioned, I am the global head of DEI at Shutterstock, where I lead the company's DEI program overall. I like to think about today's event as representative of how we at Shutterstock are thinking about incorporating DEI across the business. I think the first thing that we usually focus on is on creating an inclusive culture overall, right? And so we are working on creating that inclusive culture. And I think that our representation today from Shutterstock, from both Margarita on the panel, as well as Alessandra, who in their day jobs are thinking about inclusion every step of the way. I think that's an excellent way of how we're thinking about inclusive culture, right? And how people can think about what's the opportunity in their day jobs to create more inclusion in and outside of the business. We are also focused on building a more diverse pipeline and an inclusive workforce. And I hope that our partnership overall with Women in AI will help us to reach more women in tech so that we can send the message that at Shutterstock, we think there are plenty of opportunities for them and that we welcome more women in our tech fields because we know that they bring excellent perspectives to the work that they do. Additionally, we're focusing on our product and content. As Alexandra mentioned earlier, we partnered with Women in AI to give a call to action as to how we can get more content showing women in tech careers. And so we can begin to promote more inclusive best practices across the folks that use our content overall. The importance of us as a company focusing on DEI is because we have a responsibility to help create a more inclusive society. And from my perspective, the best way for us to do that is to look inward at our culture and our operations. How are we operating as a company? And then we look at how we show up in our communities and in our products. And I think our relationship with Women in AI cuts across all three of those areas that we tend to focus on. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion. And as Alessandra mentioned, the special surprise in the Metaverse after. Looking forward to that after party. So thanks, Alessandra. I'm going to turn it back over to you. Again, throughout the conversation, if you have questions, you could just drop it in the chat and we'll get to them.
Thank you, Mikkel. Thank you for giving us important perspective. I'd like to welcome on this virtual stage our panelists. So we'll start with a very quick introduction because we have some amazing panelists and I'd like you to get to know them a little bit better. So I'd like to start with our artist, Jeroen van der Moost. Please join us on stage and give us a little bit of an introduction.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Great honor to be here. I'm artist Jeroen van der Moost, and I'm working with artificial intelligence as an artist, as a creative medium. And this means I create all sorts of installations that use AI to generate imagery, textual content, movie content, etc. And well, the overall theme is that these installations are experiments with actually a new, different, better, more positive form of using technology, using artificial intelligence. So that's a little bit in short about me.
Thank you very much, and feel free to share your link on our chat because your installation are just mind-blowing. So I'd like to welcome on stage Simone Bartlett. Please introduce yourself. I think you are on mute.
First I'll come off.
Yes.
Yes, I'll come off mute. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Simone Bartlett, and I sit on the board of Black in AI, a nonprofit dedicated to increasing the presence and inclusion of Black people in the field of AI. I am also the co-founder and CEO of Yugo, a for-profit that provides data labeling and content moderation teams to companies that want to diversify their supply chain and also generate more economic opportunity for disadvantaged communities. Thank you to Alessandra and Mikkel and the entire Shutterstock and Women AI teams for hosting this very important event and getting this conversation going, and also for inviting me to share my thoughts. Thank you.
An absolute honor to have you with us. And next panelist, Margarita. She is an AI scientist at Shutterstock. She represents a very strong group of AI scientists, the women scientists at Shutterstock. So welcome on stage, Margarita.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. As Alessandra said, I'm one of the data scientists at Shutterstock at AI services team, and our work focusing on developing machine learning models for contextual image recommendations. And as part of my work, we also test this model for bias in order to prevent unfair AI as much as we can. Thank you.
Very good, Margarita. Margarita, I'd like to start and open up this panel with you. And I really want to start with talking about diverse representation in AI. As you know, recently UNESCO has launched the recommendation on the ethics of AI. I'll share the link on the chat so everyone has access to this amazing document. And this document, there was an entire chapter, chapter 6, to gender equality in AI. So you represent a very small but strong, talented community of women in this field. So what's your journey in AI? And how do you see the need of having more women in this field?
Yes, so I will start with my journey in AI, which is not the shorter one could take, because when I was still at school, I wasn't really exposed to computational training. That came much later when I was working on my master thesis and I have to use programming language to process some data. And that's when it occurred to me how amazing machine learning is and the power it gave me to understand my data at that point. So then for my PhD studies, I chose to combine neuroscience, which was my initial background, with computer science, and so I did. But one thing I've noticed as I was progressively moving towards more computational field was that the proportion of women, unfortunately, it kept decreasing. And quite frequently by the end of my academic training, I would find myself in male-dominated environments. So we definitely need more women in the field. And not just because, of course, we want to have fairness in terms of opportunities, but I think in general, when you hire diversity, you on board different perspectives and different ways of thinking. And all these kind of different minds can challenge each other to think outside of the box, which will lead to innovation and I think in general enhance problem solving. So we definitely need more women.
Thank you, Margarita. Really very interesting point on the decreasing number as we progress in our career. I really resonate with a lot with that. Simone, I'd like to come to you, because when it comes to representation, people of color are even more underrepresented. And we know this from years. And in the last 5 years, the percentage of women has increased 1%, which is really a staggering number. So can you share with us a little bit more about Black in AI and why it's so important to our field and your vision behind this group?
Yes, I can. So, as I mentioned in my intro, so Black in AI is a community, sort of a group that has come together to get more Black people, or at least some Black people, into the room when AI-based solutions are being conceptualized and designed and deployed. As a community, we have a lot at stake. Most machine learning algorithms are trained on data that reflects historical, bias and discrimination. So the solutions that we're seeing often replicate that bias, and in cases, some pretty prominent cases even magnify it. So what we know as a community is that we need to get more people in the room. And when we think about getting people into the room, where do you start? And I think for us, where we focus at Black in AI is around research and more recently entrepreneurship. So research, because when you think about, what gets studied, right? the researchers have play a big role in, like, what eventually comes to life. And of the over 1,500 PhDs that were issued in the US, across universities in the US, right? Computer science, information science, and computer engineering, only 20 were issued to Black researchers. And if you think about, all the large companies, 20 wouldn't be even be enough for one person, for one researcher to sit at every company. So we have a big focus on, getting more researchers into the pipeline, helping research into the PhD pipeline, helping those in the PhD programs, get to companies that really will welcome the insights and perspectives they bring. And also, we started focusing on entrepreneurship, right? What gets built? What are we designing solutions for, and what are sort of the perspectives behind, like, how to make this a solution more just and more fair? And I think, unlike, past initiatives, we see like a clear opportunity for us to, be at the center of helping companies that are truly interested in building more equitable teams and building more equitable research departments and building more equitable, experiences across the board. We think that we can play a big role, starting from, the pipeline of, let's just get more people into PhD programs. When people are in PhD programs, let's just get more people into the organizations that are sort of driving, the future. And if I think about our future, I'd say it's one where outcomes are equitable. And we know that outcomes are a function of the inputs. So we're very focused on the inputs, but in terms of vision, those inputs are to get us to a place where outcomes are just more equitable.
I love, Simon, your point on investing on education. We don't need just to reach a quota. We need to get people talented in this space that are able to build their career and strive in this field. So investing on education, it seems very much the right thing to do in this moment to grow the pipeline. Jeroen, I'm curious about your perspective. What do you think we need to do to increase diversity of women and underrepresented group of AI? Looked from your double background, your artistic side and your computer science background as well.
Well, again, it's an interesting question. I can tell a little bit about the role of art that I see, and the role of art, well, I see in my project. So I can say, if you see art in this context, I can say that art is really about inspiring. So really about inspiring change in society, about inspiring change in organizations as well. So this can be by actually showing different futures or speculating about utopian futures, better utopian futures, or on the other side, showing the dystopian futures that could also occur or are occurring at the moment already. So it's really about inspiring and about speculation, about showing examples, inspiring examples also for change. And if I really look at my own practice in my installations, which are using these art installations using artificial intelligence, the actual aim of these installations is often actually making underrepresented voices more present in organizations, in society in general. So this could be in a variety of ways. For example, I worked on installations in which we worked on actually using artificial intelligence to give voice to nature in the climate debate by using text generation artificial intelligence. But another example is, and we might see a little bit more about that one in the Metaverse exhibit later on. It's actually an art piece. It's called The Spirit Machine that I worked on for Radboud University, the Netherlands, together with Gabrielle Ras. She's a PhD candidate AI at the university, and actually worked on this installation, this AI-based installation that is inspired on the work of Maria Montessori. So the founder of the Montessori education system, and actually uses AI to bring her values, her ideas into the organization again. So it's this big installation actually showing, creating continuously a stream of new ideas, new content based on those values from Maria Montessori. It's These values about connection, about modesty in consumption, etc., etc. So there's a little bit about the maybe the more innovative aspects of these installations in which you can actually give some sort of presence to underrepresented voices.
Thank you very much. And indeed, we'll see in the metaverse more about this installation and the art that you have created. And I want to move even deeper into this line that you have opened between the interaction between AI and art. So Jeroen, let's continue with you, because your work has achieved global visibility with your creation, exhibition in museum and everywhere in the world. So your background as computer science has an important component into your journey. What has inspired you to combine art and AI in a way that gives rise to such disruptive technology?
Yeah, it's indeed the case that I once worked in data science and market research, so something like 10, 12 years ago, and I worked with all these algorithms to do all these studies, for bigger brands, bigger nonprofits, etc. And at some point, I mean, it's really interesting, fascinating work. It was also really intellectually challenging. But at some point, for me, it's really about something really rational. Like it's about comprehension of the world. So it's about building models, about concepts, about segments, etc. And this is fascinating, although at that time, I really wanted to do something else than purely comprehend the world. I wanted to enrich the world. So I really wanted to make this switch from comprehension, from these models, from comprehension to enrichment, and actually add something creatively to the world. So new ideas, new thoughts about things that happen in society, etc. Maybe even add some more complexity instead of simplicity to the world, what I knew from these models. So that's a little bit about what inspired me to actually make that switch toward actually creating new stuff with AI.
Yeah, and I love this idea of breaking the boundary on what's accepted, what's the commonplace, what's the standard, and trying to push it beyond. I like to go to Margarita. So we have heard many times about bias in AI. So can you explain us, maybe in simple words, how it originated and what we can do to prevent it?
Yes, of course. So there are different ways to introduce bias in AI, but I will focus on the most common one. So one way to create, let's say, an AI model is by feeding the computer lots of data, such as images. Then the computer, by digesting this real-world data, learns to associate human characteristics. So a machine can simply replicate the world as it is. And we know in the world we have biases. So this bias in the world, in other words, can also result in unbalanced data sets, which means non-diverse data sets that AI practitioners use. Using unbalanced data sets can result in a biased model. And we have like a few notable examples in face recognition, where some of the first softwares fail to recognize darker skinned people compared to lighter skinned people, because these models have been trained and tested primarily to lighter skinned people. So therefore, it's absolutely necessary to constantly monitor every process for different types of biases. And as I mentioned earlier, in my team, we work with machine learning models for contextual image recommendations. And these models define which images on the platform will be higher up in terms of the recommendations and which will be lower down. So with my team, we monitor these models that the sorting of the images is not affected by things such as the age of the people, the color of the skin, or the sex of the person depicted in the photo. And if a model does show some bias, then it's definitely not deployed to production, and on contrary will be retrained. So in that way, we try to use AI to represent different human groups equally and kind of trying to fix the bias that exists by using AI.
Very interesting perspective, Margarita. Thanks for this explanation and that is accessible to everyone. So I'd like to go to Simone. So we have heard from Margarita how the first generation of AI system, some famous case like face recognition, have failed to classify Black people. And mainly because of the lack of data, but also the lack of diversity in the teams of people that have built those systems. So the question to you really is, what can we do to increase the representation of Black people and inspire them to see themselves in different roles in society, and most importantly, in the tech and AI space?
Thanks for that question. I think it's a good one. And as I think about it, I struggle a bit because, you know, the question around like, you know, how we can be inspired to see ourselves. I think a big frustration in our community is, you know, we see ourselves one way, but the society keeps representing us a different way. And what we want is to close the gap between, you know, how we see ourselves and how we think that we are either being represented or are underrepresented. That, you know, popped into my head as you were asking the question. That said, you know, I do have a few thoughts on specific things that can be done to increase representation. So I think the first thing is, you know, KPIs. I think, you know, I run a company. If something is important, we have to vision it and we have to, like, you know, track it, measure it. And I think one of the challenges that, you know, Margarita talked about was like, and if we don't have the right people in the room, because sometimes we just can't, right? Sometimes the pipeline just isn't there. How do we go about getting to, you know, better outcomes? A lot of times, you know, what I see is intervention towards the end. And I think if we had more intervention at the beginning, I think that would go a long way. So I think the other thing that I see is, you know, we start at the bottom, and I think there's more room to start at the top. So in my day job, I do a lot of, you know, like, you know, client selling. And when I see, I'm the supplier diversity team, which is who I interact with most, will be 90%, you know, Black and brown people. But when I meet the procurement team, it is, you know, 5% Black and brown people. And just having more balance, right? The procurement team has the purse. You know, the supplier diversity team is making introductions, but how do we have more balance so that, you know, solutions are sort of, you know, everyone is on the same page about, you know, how to get to the right solution. And, you know, the people that we're bringing into organizations to help us get to better solutions, you know, actually have some power to sort of influence the final outcome. So I think those are some specific things that, you know, we can do to sort of increase representation. If I can use the, you know, Shutterstock as an example. So, you know, we heard Margarita talk about, you know, well, we want to make sure that, you know, as we train models, they're not biased. When we go to, you know, to work with vendors who bring us the data sets and vendors who help us label our data sets, you know, are we looking for diversity there as well? And that's where, like, you know, who sits in procurement, who sits in, you know, your supply diversity team, who sits in, you know, even just like the program managers themselves, how are they incentivized and how aware and what is their awareness of the situation, and really urgency to, like, you know, fix it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree. Those are very practical and important points, and you have touched on the importance of data set. I'd like to expand a little bit more into that, but I'm seeing that we are starting to receive some good question from the audience. John, I have seen your question. I'll get back on your question very, very soon in our next round. But as we are on data set topic at the moment, I'd like to go to Jeroen. Jeroen, you have worked with a number of different AI systems which create visual representation of concept, reimagining reality, creating really new idea. Based on your experience, how important it is to create diverse visual representation, and how we can make sure that data sets that are used to train those AI systems are audited for diversity and equal representation?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah, regarding the diverse representation. Yeah, that's of crucial importance. So for me personally, that's sort of also the goal of my art in itself. So actually present this other diverse picture of which kind of dominant challenges the dominant thinking patterns. So it's always about bringing textual content that kind of conflicts with what is the general way of seeing stuff. And regarding data sets, that's a pretty interesting one, but also a difficult one, because for example, what I work with is quite a lot is for example GPT-3. So it's this big text generation model to generate these really high quality texts if a human would have written them. But the actual data sources, so the data set that's behind the GPT-3, it's actually not public. So you don't really know what kind of data is in there. So on the one hand, this really calls for this more transparency, of course, or this sort of maybe open source ways of actually using more open source models with kind of transparency in their data sets. But even if you would have that, I guess even there would be difficulties, because these huge data sets, they're so vast, which are behind these large language models. It's really, you're talking there about these really systems which really are based on this kind of text volume. It's like size in comparison comparable to the whole textual internet. So it would be really hard to grasp how that, if that textual content is actually representative of what, or so the actual thing that I do in my artworks is actually what Margarita described. It's actually always being really critical and always monitoring the actual output of the systems, of the creative systems, and see if there's any bias in there, and if so, then you have to retweak or readjust the system to get to some sort of more unbiased output.
I love your point, Jeroen. You are so right. When we deal with massive volume of data, really deeply understanding all the nuances that they bring into those models, it's an absolutely challenging task. So investing even more into visualization and data exploration techniques is fundamentally important. And really building on top of this important line of thought, I also want to go back to what the question from John. So let's start with Margarita. So a couple of questions, a little bit more of a general question. I'd like to understand your perspective on whether you think that we are missing standard and guidelines for AI practitioner on how to design inclusive AI, and then maybe going into the specific of the question that John didn't ask, which are the tools that are used to investigate and monitor and correct bias in data. And I also want to thank you, Constantina, who is also bringing her knowledge into the discussion. I love to have this interaction between the participants, the attendees, and the panelists. So back to you, Margarita.
Yes, so I will start with the guidelines and start with what is missing, and then I'll move to the bias testing that we do. So first of all, actually, there are guidelines that define specifically that there should be fairness in AI. And actually, I recently went through the European Union ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI. And in that document, it was explicitly mentioned that AI systems should be monitored constantly and that AI systems should ensure diversity and inclusiveness. And also think the same points are made in the document that you shared, Alessandra, from UNESCO, exactly the same points. So I think what currently is missing is a unified standard practice within industry how to perform inclusive AI in order to follow these existing guidelines. And I think it's crucial to beat these standards because as AI becomes more involved in more aspects in our life, the implication of unfairness will only get greater. And as what we can do in the field, I think first of all, it's very important that as industry, we continue educating AI practitioners like myself, so we understand these issues better and in detail, and we're able to identify them. And I think this great education will enable us to start collaborating in order to beat these standards to reduce bias and unequal representation. Of course, this needs time, but I think most importantly, it also needs diverse input from diverse stakeholders within and beyond those who design, develop, and deploy AI applications. So it needs input from members of communities that may be impacted by the deployment of AI systems. And at this point, I want to give an example that I think for this reason at Shutterstock, we now have close collaboration between AI scientists and the diversity, equity, and inclusion specialists. So we can also understand better and build a better standards for our system. Then to answer the question in the chat, I can also give an example of what I do my work, because sometimes through an example is better to understand. For example, to monitor that there's no bias, one way to do that is by creating curated data sets where you have hundreds of images that you can group them. Let's say, I'll take as an example the sex of the person. So you have 100 images of male and female, and then you compare the scores that they come out of the model. Are they within the same range? If they're not, why they're not? And then if they're not, then you go back in redesigning the training or even balancing your data by upscaling or downscaling the data that are more superfluous in your data set. And also, just add something, in the Metaverse, I also have a couple of photos from the bias data set, so feel free to join.
Yes, and the classes are always evolving. We have non-binary, we have trans representation. So, and it's a field that is constantly evolving, and that's why this discussion is very important. And I will also want to go back to what Pamela is telling us in our chat, in including diversity officers in our job. And that's exactly what Margarita has said. She is collaborating with our head of diversity, equity, and inclusion and his team, Mikkel and his team, to constantly challenge the way that we interpret our data. We create those classes, we put label on those classes, and we really expand on those boundaries in new ways. So absolutely, we see the need of working with Mikkel and his team, and even more, we hope we can be an example that other companies can emulate, because it's definitely inspiring a lot of progresses in our technical development and in our approach and in our thinking. I also like to continue this discussion with Simone, because standard setting, it's such a big topic. And I'd like to understand your perspective on those different aspects. What should we do as experts in the field to continue to push the boundaries further?
So I think, the biggest thing for me is, starting at the beginning. I think, at the beginning, we can determine the outcomes. And what I see in many instances is, what I call inclusivity intervention towards the end, or sometimes even at deployment. And, when I think about things that we can do at the beginning to get to the outcomes we want, I think, all of us want to be good at our jobs. And I think companies and heads of departments need to clearly say what good looks like, right? So we can start with good means inclusive, right? So if we build a model, it is good, but not inclusive. It's like, oh, it's not good because it's not inclusive. And inclusive means X. So I think that's something that could be transformative, just defining good and having inclusive and representative be a big part of, if something is good or not good. The second thing I think that, we can do in the field is, create forcing mechanisms to heighten awareness in the moment. So I think, a lot of times we know, but in the moment we're so busy, trying to get it perfect or get it right, that if you don't have, mechanisms that sort of keep us keep those guardrails in the moment, things sort of fall apart. And, if I was thinking about, imagine if before every design sprint, there was a checklist, right? Like, each of the below categories is represented in the room. Yes. And if no, what are we going to do to make sure that we get those perspectives in the room, even if we can't get those bodies in the roam? So in the moment, as, we're working on the work and, doing the work of the work, in the back of our mind, we're conscious that, oh, I don't have a native, American in the room, and this will affect that community. And how do I go and get those perspectives? I think those are two small things, very practical that, we can do to make sure that as the work is being done, it's just like we're very aware, and we're very nervous that at the end, what we don't want is for this to not be inclusive, because not inclusive automatically means not good.
Can I jump in, and since we're keeping this a bit casual in a sense, because I really love those points, Simone, because I think for us to be, there were some feedback here about having the diversity specialists connected with the board as well as involved. I think the reality of this is that the diversity person, if you want to call it that, is one person throughout an entire organization. And for this to become something that's lived, it has to be a shared responsibility across the board for everyone. And the two suggestions that you make in terms of a checklist, right? Like when you're starting projects, are you thinking about equity and inclusion from the beginning of this project? So it's not supposed to be the save after, it's at the very beginning, and that can make a huge difference, whether or not the diversity person is in the room, right? Because there are other people who are not that person, who are the people who are leading the programs, that will be the ones who are making the decisions there. And so without the absence of me, one of the things that I say all the time, without the absence of me, I need to know that other people are thinking about DEI, because otherwise it's not sustainable. And so that is essential. Like, I don't want Shutterstock DEI program to be built on my back, right? One, that's a lot of pressure, and two, it's just not feasible. And so that's a really good point, and I'm glad that you made that point. I do want to ask a question to the rest of the panelists though, because there's a lot of talk about ensuring that the data set is balanced. So you have good representation between people of color or underrepresented people and others, right? But is the question always balanced, or is it more of the type of data that's being fed in? Because if you have a balance of 50-50 data set, right? But then for Black people, the representation is those stereotypical kind of things or whatever it is. Is that good data? Anyone can answer.
I can start. Yes, I just gave the simplest example, which is just the number. But then the biases within the contextual information is an extra problem that also needs to be tested. There's so many things that need to be tested in order to fight bias. So short answer is of course not a good data set. And there are extra tests that need to be done just for this contextual information within a single image, as you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to jump in on this one as well. It's not about boxes and putting the right numbers into those boxes. Is how do we fill those boxes with genuine information? How do we represent beyond the stereotypes? How do we break those stereotypes? And how we avoid that we learn from past behavior. Sometimes it's not just the data itself. It's the use of that data that create a relationship and a connotation that has a cultural heritage that we bring it forward in the future, which makes me very scared in thinking that we are building a future as a reflection of many things of the past that we don't like and we don't agree with. And we need to break those association relationship that we have built between our unaware behavior of our unconscious biases and those data set. And moving forward, identify those relationships and breaking those relationships is as important as creating data set with good representation, not just balance.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I'll say on this, Alessandra, is that it's going to be a lot of the people who are creating the data sets or even creating images to challenge themselves, right? One of the things that I'm creating right now for a group of people is when you're thinking about marketing, like what kind of images are you using? And to your point, an important thing is context. So you might put together an image of two people and you're thinking, oh, this is a great image, but contextually, there's some historical things that are in that image that you're not thinking about. So like when you put it up, a question to ask yourself, like, is there something contextually that I'm not thinking about right now? Sometimes you may miss it, sometimes you may find it, but the important thing, I think, is the principle that's applied to it that helps you to interrogate yourself to ensure that you're not bringing your biases into the decisions that you're making.
Absolutely. Beautifully said. So I think we are getting so close to the end of this first part of this event. We want to give enough time to our Metaverse expert to explain how we will transit and jump into this Metaverse immersive experience with our artists and scientists. But before going into the Metaverse, just very quick final question to our panelists. All of you, the same question is really around recommendation on how to break the bias. We want to let our audience living with some actionable insight. So this is the year we know of breaking the bias. So what are you planning to do to contribute to it? And what would you recommend us here today, listening to you, of how to get involved in this movement? So let me start with Simone.
Sorry, I was on mute. That's a good question. I'm gonna say empathy. I'm gonna bring empathy to break the bias, because I understand that what we're trying to do is really hard. We're trying to build a future. We need to use data and systems from the past, but we want that future to not, contain the historical biases and discrimination of the past. And that's a really tough challenge. As I think about, even Margarita in her role, she doesn't just have her job. She also has to make sure that even the data and everything I'm getting, I have a second job of making sure the data is good and clean. So I think, if I come into it with empathy, and sort of what Mikkel said at the beginning is like, what are you going to do in your day job, right? Like, what are the opportunities you have in your day job? And I bring more empathy into my day job. It'll help me to think about, how do I help companies that are ready to get it right, do better, right? Like, how do I, because when you're empathetic, you just create better solutions. So I'm going to bring empathy into my day job more. And hope that empathy helps me create better solutions for companies that want to get to better AI outcomes, because I do understand it's a tough ask for where we are as a society and where we want to be.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Jeroen.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, of course. Yeah, many things to be said about it. But one of the things I'll be working on this, or actually I'm working on now, it's actually with the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. And it's actually the system which uses AI, but combines it with quantum computing. And it will be this system that's actually will be capable of judging, giving judgments and opinions on all sorts of topics, but also think about work, think about the economy and how it functions. And it will do in a way that's kind of a little bit different than we're used to opinions in our kind of polarized contemporary society. So we're really used to it's A or B and really clear. And this is a system that's really about causing doubt and doubt about the mainstream thought. So it will really give this presentation of opinions and judgments, which are really from all sorts of different perspectives and positions from all sorts of minorities, etc., etc. And in that way, reflect on topics like that. And in a more general sense, all I can say is really, to all the content creators, to all data science, really what's also been said before, you really have to start with a mindset at the beginning already in the design of what you do in the art projects, research projects, really about this. Yeah, really have already the mindset of this diverse mindset and creating stuff that will be inspiring and really challenging to the mainstream think patterns in society. So.
I
Yeah.
love this idea of challenging our own perspective and interacting technology to see other perspective in a very equalizing world. Margarita, I'll finish with you. What would be your advice?
I think in a personal level, as a contribution and as a data scientist, I want to become more vocal. And I don't mean just at Shutterstock, but within my data scientist friends to check for biases, because I can tell sometimes it's not the top priority of a data scientist job. And then what I want to say today, if you're a woman and you're thinking to like move into tech, please try it. A couple of years ago, I was also terrified in doing that because I couldn't see enough role models, but try it. You're only going to regret if you don't try it. Yeah.
I love your finishing notes. And I'd like to now invite on stage Gabi. Gabi will walk us through what we have to do to jump into the metaverse. She'll share the link and she'll explain what we'll see in this experience. Gabi, come on stage. The floor is for you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you. Yeah, it is actually really easy. The metaverse world has become more easy to enter every month, and we chose a spatial to have a gallery for the networking after this event and a little party maybe. And so all you really have to do is, because it's browser-based, I just shared a link in the chat. And if you just click on the link, then it will take you to a website. And there you can just log in without registering. And you'll find Eve there. And she is already waiting. There are already people there, by the way. So you will not be alone. The thing is, if you want to take it up a notch, and if you really want to look like yourself, Alessandra, am I a co-host? Can I share my screen? Okay, let me do that. I'll just show you what's waiting for you, because this is not your normal metaverse.
Yeah, I had a sneaky peek, and there are many people already there. Super immediate for everyone to jump.
Okay, let's see here. And share.
And obviously you'll find us there to be around the artistic creation and to share with you some of those experiences. Yes, okay, so Gabi, we see it.
The party already started, as you can see. Eve is already dancing. And as those of you who know Eve will see that, you can really actually look like yourself. All you need to do in order to do that is have a portrait photo of yourself ready, like the photo that you use on LinkedIn. That's usually a good idea. and just click to get started. There will be a button. You can just jump in, without registering. But if you want to look like yourself and do, maybe take a fancy selfie of yourself, also to spread the word later on, then I'll recommend to you to click get started. You will see that presenting on the screen. Register. You only need to use the social login or an email, confirm the email, and then upload your selfie. And then Spatial will create a 3D avatar for you within seconds. I will stay here. Please just click on the link in the chat, try to get in. And if you have problems, I'll stay here in Zoom and guide you in if you need help.
Thank you very much, Gabi. It's very easy to navigate with your arrow or just pointing on the floor, and your avatar will just move around the direction where you point at. So explore, there is amazing content. Before we finish, I think I'd like to thanks the sponsor of this event, Shutterstock, the collaboration with Women in AI to make this possible, Eveness and Spatial.io for allowing us to have this experience in the metaverse and share this with you. But most importantly, our panelists and our special guest, Mikkel, to enable us into this important discussion. So thank you, everyone. Please join us into the metaverse. We'll wait you there for further discussion around the art that we have there. Bye, everyone.
Bye, and thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's a wonderful opportunity to have you all here in the Women in AI Gallery. That was a